What happens as the tide goes in and out, or, as we know it, floods and ebbs? As the tide floods and ebbs, it doesn't just go up and down, it also moves along the coastline in a lateral movement. We call this movement a tidal stream. This map is showing the direction of those tidal streams on an incoming tide, or the flood tide. As you can see, the tide moves along the north coast of Scotland and down the east coast into the Wash. At the same time, it's moving along the south coast, around the English Channel and into the Wash. It also gets pushed up the Irish Sea and into Morecambe Bay, at the same time as being pushed around the top of Ireland and into Morecambe Bay. It takes approximately 6 hours for the tide to come in to its furthest extent. This map is showing the direction of the tidal streams as the tide goes out, or ebbs. As you can see, the arrows simply turn direction and head in the opposite way to the flood. Again, it takes approximately 6 hours for the tide to completely go out. There is therefore 6 hours from high water to low water. As tidal streams move along the coastline, they can speed up as they wrap around headlands, squeeze between islands, and move over shallowings in the seabed. Wherever tidal streams encounter a headland, we get an effect called a tidal race. Essentially, what happens is the tidal stream is accelerated as it gets thrown around the tip of the headland. The associated waters off that headland can often be turbulent, fast moving and very rough. We quite often get a secondary effect as tidal streams are accelerated around the headland. We can get what we call a back eddy created. As the water passes around the headland, we get a current moving in the opposite direction on the down tide side of the headland. Overfalls are created as the tidal stream is forced over a shallow area of the seabed. This can be either a reef, rocks, or a sandbar. Again, the tide is squeezed and accelerated, and the associated waters are turbulent, fast flowing, and often very rough. Tidal streams usually have the same effect if the tide is either flooding or ebbing. That is, we can get a tidal race or an overfall on both the flood and the ebb. The rate that the tide goes in and out is not constant through the 6 hours of the flood or the ebb. For the height of the tide, we use something called the rule of twelfths. In the first hour, the tide comes in 1/12. In the second hour, it'll come in 2/12. In the third hour, the tide will come in 3/12. For the fourth hour, another 3/12. The fifth hour, 2/12. And for the last hour, 1/12. From this diagram, we can see that the greatest amount of tidal movement is in the third and fourth hour. If we were to sit on a beach and watch the same thing happen, we would see the tides suddenly start to come in very quickly in the third and fourth hour. For the change of the speed of tidal streams, we use something called the 50-90 rule. At slack water, the tide will be at 0% of its maximum speed. By the end of the first hour, it will be at 50% of its maximum speed. The second hour, 90%, and by the end of the third hour, at 100% of its maximum speed. The fourth hour, 90%, and by the end of the fifth hour, 50%. By the end of the sixth hour, it'll have slowed down to slack water. The arrow in this diagram represents the speed of the tide. As you can see, the speed increases with each hour until it reaches its maximum speed at the end of the third hour. The tide then starts to slow down as it comes up to slack water. It's important to remember that the rule of twelfths and the 50-90 rule both apply to the tide flooding and ebbing. I hope you found this DVD useful. By now you should understand the causes of our daily tides, the causes and effects of spring and neap tides, understand how tidal streams are created, causes and effects of races and overfalls, how the height of tide changes as it floods and ebbs, and also how the speed of tidal streams change within the 6 hours of the flood and the ebb. Some of the content in this DVD has been greatly simplified. To achieve a greater knowledge and for more information on planning, see the Sea Kayak Navigation book by Franco Ferreira.